Welcome to another BENlabs. It's been a while since I have had an opportunity to connect with my Ben community via BENlabs. So I'm super excited for that. And it happens to be a really special reason why I am connecting. It's because it's Black History Month in the UK. And guess what? I happen to be in the UK to celebrate it. So I'm here with our London office, and I'm about to step out and help them connect to this conversation so that we can all join in. But before we do that, I wanted to introduce our speaker today. Today, we're going to do something a little different. We are going to provide a keynote, and the keynote is by a wonderful author, British author, who I have, luckily connected with, and his name is Alex Wheatle. And Alex, he is a professor here, but as I mentioned, he's also an author. He was born in London to Jamaican parents, which is not too far from myself. I was born in Canada to Jamaican parents. Alex spent most of his childhood in social services care. He is a huge fan of reggae, like very much like myself and some other folks that we know at Ben. And in his mid-teens, he was the founding member of the Crucial Rocker sound system, where he wrote lyrics for performances in community halls, youth clubs, and blues dances in South London. His first novel, Brixton Rock, was published to critical acclaim by Black Amber Books in 1999, and Alex won the London Arts Board Writers' Prize in the year 2000. So, East of Acre Lane was published by Fourth Estate HarperCollins, which we're familiar with, in 2001. He also wrote several other books, including Seven Sisters, Homeboys, Island Songs, co-wrote a book by the name of Checkers, The Dirty South, and then Alex in 2008 was awarded an MBE for his services to literature. Brenton Brown, which was his sequel to Brixton Rocks, was published by Arcadia in 2011. Alex also wrote and performed his own one-man show, Uprising, in 2011. It was produced by Tara Arts, and Alex toured the UK with that show during the years of 2011 and 2012. Alex's first adult novel, Lickle was pronounced by Little Brown in March of 2015. It was long listed for the Carnegie Medal in 2015. I hope you all took note of the way I pronounce Lickle because
Yeah,
that is the authentic way in which to pronounce it, right, Alex?
that's right. Yeah.
Shame and Scandal, Alex. Thank you. Shame and Scandal, Alex's debut play, played to a sold-out audience at the Albany Theater in Deptford in October 2015. Crankton Nights, the follow-up novel to Lickle was published by Little Brown in March 2016. And his accolades and his work continues and continues until the most recent piece, which was Witness, which was published in September of 2022. Steve McQueen directed a television drama related to the tale of Alex's young life for the BBC in 2020. Alex was presented with a doctorate for his services to literature by the University of Sussex in 2022. I am so proud and so humbled to introduce Alex to my Ben community here in our London offices. You can't see the team. I'm going to step out and join them. But I am so proud to have Alex here with us. And Alex, I want to thank you for joining us and sharing your insights on what it's like to be Black in Britain. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. And thank you for that introduction. Wow, that was quite incredible looking back on my career. So, we're going to start off in sunny Jamaica. That is where my story begins. It begins in the early 1930s when both my parents were born. My mother was born in a small town in Richmond in the parish of St. Mary. And my father was born in Old Harbour, which is about 20 miles or so west of Kingston. And it was my father who was years old, and he saw representatives from the UK because the UK needed rebuilding after the Second World War, and so they made a call out to the Commonwealth countries, the Caribbean included, and so my he was in technical college at the time studying carpentry and joinery, and so with a lot of hope, a lot of a lot of aspiration, he came to the UK in 1954. He was 21 years of age. Indeed, when he arrived in the UK, it was very cold, very grim, very grey. These are his words. London was pretty much bombed out, and so he began work, and it was a very hostile environment, because I think when the UK actually asked for the Commonwealth to help rebuild the country, they were not expecting too many black people to come from the Caribbean. I think they wanted more Australians and people from New Zealand and so on. And so that kind of alarmed them. And so when my father arrived, sometimes he would see signs in hotels and lodging houses, no blacks, no dogs, no Irish, and so on. And so that shocked him, the level of racism that was around in the UK at that time in the mid 1950s. But he, he always had work to do. And so he set about trying to build some kind of life. But my mother, she came to the UK after a different reason, really, because she already was married to a man, but because of volatile situations in her marriage, she decided to come to the UK in a very early 1960s, and she wanted to make a new start, find a job, send some money back home, and her intention was always to return to Jamaica and use the money that she had earned in England to set up a life for herself and her children. And so she settled in Brixton, South London, and she found a job in a retail store. And mother also settled in Brixton, South London. And so obviously my parents met, and they took a liking to each other. And my mother said, I'm a married woman and so on. I might be seeking a divorce when I return to Jamaica, but I'm a married woman. But despite that, they began seeing each other. And to complicate things, my mother became pregnant with me in summer 1962. And so that really put the pressure on because, what are they going to do? Especially in those days where it was a married woman to be pregnant by another man. And so they had to decide what was going to happen thereafter. And so what was decided when I was born on the 3rd of January 1963, my mother called my father from the hospital when he 2 days old, and she said to him, "I think it might be best that you look after our son because I have to return to Jamaica, and it will be best for him. And we hope to meet each other again, but I really have to return to Jamaica to sort out my affairs." My father at the time, he was a bit worried, a bit to take me on. And so that's what he did. My mother returned to Jamaica, and my father, he tried his best to look after me. But in those days, there wasn't the help that there is today to give aid to single parent families. I mean, this is the early 1960s. So he found it very difficult, especially the racism that he suffered. I mean, this is a time when Black people were not permitted to drink. Clubs in the West End would turn them away, and this is why West Indian folk decided to host their own parties in the home basements because they were denied entry to so many places. That is what my parents or my father had to deal with, and he struggled to find babysitters for me. He struggled to find decent care for me. In the end, he gave me up to social services this is 1965, and he had a bit of a breakdown, and so he also returned to Jamaica. So basically, I was an orphan, and from 1966, I was sent to one of these big children's home villages, and my my children's home was called one of the biggest in Europe at the time, and it housed up to 600, 700 children who all came from different situations, different difficulties, and something like 40, 50 cottages where the children resided. And in each cottage, there was about up to 14, sometimes 16 children. And I remember there was a big wall all the way around the outside. And this village, it had its own primary school, it had its own doctor's surgery. So it was self contained to a certain degree. And it had its own, yeah, its own kind of maintenance depot and all of that. But the problem was, it was very abusive. The people in charge there were quite brutal. It really was like a Dickensian kind of world that I was raised in, where I feared any adults because adults meant pain to you. You know, they physically abused and sexually abused men in the time that it was. And and this is when I started reading. I had the reading ability. I'm not quite sure where it come from. Maybe my mother, because she was an avid reader. But from the age of 5 or 6, um, because I just wanted an escape from my present circumstance, I would just read comics, and that took me away from being in the present, if you like. And so my reading really accelerated. I might have had trouble in secondary education, that is from 11 plus. But what always saved me was my reading ability. So up to the age of 11, I attended the primary school, the junior school, and that was within the grounds. And following that, I actually went outside Shirley Oaks to attend secondary school. And this is my first time out of this village. And I found it very odd and strange and awkward meeting other children who went home to their parents every day because I never experienced that. In all my time in Shirley Oaks, I never received not once growing up. I would ask the people who were in charge of me, who were my guardians. I would ask them, "Where are my parents?" And they would tell me that they left me on the dock of a bay, which is, I think that was a Otis Redding hit. They always use that term. I was left on the dock of the bay and I went back to the jungle. So that was the level of racism that I experienced, and many other Black children and mixed race children experience if you grew up in care. And so from a very early age, I had low esteem. I felt inferior to everybody else because I was made to judge me. And so my school education wasn't a good one. Um, I believe that I had trauma, even though I never visited any psychiatrists at the time. But looking back now, I think I suffered from delayed trauma from all the abuse that I suffered. And so my school years were troubled ones, and I would get myself into fights, especially after um, would call me all kinds of different names, you know, derogatory names, the N word, and so much more than that. And I was always the one to be blamed. So even in the education system, the racism was deep. And this is what, the late 1960s, early 1970s. And so from the age coming up 15, they decided not to send me to school anymore after one particular violent incident. And so I was returned to live in a hostel in Brixton. And this was obviously had the West Indian community. Now, growing up in Shirley Oaks, I hardly saw any Black people whatsoever. So it was a bit of a coldie. It really was. And so I had to get used to Black people being around me. And sometimes I couldn't even pick up the accent, the West Indian accent. I had to get used to the way they walked, the way they danced, the way they did things. I felt like very much like an outsider, and I was meant to be tutored by somebody coming into my hostel 3 or 4 days a week, but because I was so fascinated about street, and also I became hooked on reggae music. I wanted to hear reggae music that was played hairdresser, every pub, and so on. I just wanted to listen to that as much as possible. And so I spent a large majority of my time on the streets of Brixton. And I was only 15, 16, and that led to me being involved in petty crime. Sometimes I would do errands for a local crime lord who made money in the area by dealing with drugs and crime did. So I wasn't even aware that I was you know, abetting a criminal or aiding a criminal. It was just the way my life kind of went. I never really received any proper guidance from social services or my supposed guardians. I mean, they never really used to visit me, so I was left to my own accord, really, and I had to make my own choices. So it was a difficult time for me, while trying to understand my identity. At that point, I didn't even know that my parents were Jamaican because I never read my social services file. As far as I knew, I was left on the dock of the bay and my parents went back to the jungle. That's all they told me. So I had no idea of my historical background and so on, or where my parents were. So I grew up in this white world, if you like. So, but reggae music kind of started to introduce me to my culture, and I was grateful for that. So, really, I learned African history, Black American history through reggae music and the references that they sometimes made. Like, for example, in those days, a lot of the reggae cover album art was very political. And so I learned about people fighting for independence in countries like Angola, Mozambique, South Africa, or civil rights in the US of A. I started to read writers like James Baldwin and so on. And there was always this persecution by the police, especially in Brixton, especially towards young blacks like myself. And indeed, I learned horror stories of what the police would do to black people. I mean, the most famous one, I guess, was Olive Morris, who we still celebrate today. And she was only 17, and this is nine to stop policeman doing a Nigerian man who just parked his car. And she intervened, but for her troubles, she was taken out of the street, taken off the street, taken back to the police station, and she was battered, really battered, battered so much that when her family come to collect her, they didn't even recognize her because her face was so disfigured. And from that point onwards, Olive Morris became an activist. And so there was always brutality from the police, from the Black Brixton, where they tried to treat us, sometimes inhumanely. It was really, really bad. And because of this trouble all the time, the resentment grew with my generation and it exploded in April 1981 when I was 18. And I was caught up in the middle of that. There was a massive riot in Brixton, and basically Brixton burned for 3 days and 3 nights. The US of A, like in the West area and so on. I remember watching news reels of especially the riots after Martin Luther King passed away. So it was very similar to what happened in Brixton in 91. And so, yes, I was throwing bricks, I was throwing petrol bombs and so on. And many of my friends, they got arrested. and I felt that I got away. But some weeks later, the police came for me. They battered down my bedroom door. They basically arrested me in my underwear. They threw me into the police van, and they took me down to Brixton police station. They beat me up there. They left me for something like 2 days without food, only water. And some days later, I appeared in court, charged with assaulting a police officer, charged with causing a disturbance, and charged with a breach of the peace. And as the magistrate or the judge was summing up the case and about to deliver his sentence, I wasn't paying no attention to the public gallery where I was lined up with about 6 or 7 other defendants, and they were all charged with supposed crimes committed during the Brixton riots, and we was awaiting our sentences. But I was just magnetized by the public gallery because all my fellow defendants, they had their family there. They had their mums and dads sitting in the public gallery, and their aunts and uncles, brothers and sisters and cousins, and I looked and stared, and I realized I was all alone to support me at this trial or this case. And that really crushed me. It crushed my spirit. And to be honest, after I was sentenced to a year's prison, it didn't really matter to me because I just wanted to end my life. That was the overpowering feeling that I had at that point. I just wanted to end it all because my life hadn't really mounted to much and I had no aspiration. I had no hope of ever bettering my life. And so I didn't see no other way out. And so I started my prison term in a prison west of London called Wormwood Scrubs. And they give me my prison uniform. They escorted me to my cell. They clanged or filled my nose. And it was so bad that my eyes watered and I cleared my eyes. I got my focus back and I realized I was in a very small cell. I looked to my right and there were bunk beds there. On the bottom bunk was this Rastafarian, and he had long greying locks down to his knees. He had a lazy eye, and he had missing front teeth. I remember that. And he gave me a knowing look. I wasn't quite sure what he meant by that, but so I didn't want to have any eye contact with him whatsoever. So I kept my gaze away from him. Next to the bunk beds was a bookshelf that my cellmate had, and he had books by black authors, black writers, and so on. I didn't really pay any attention. I just, I was being suicidal, so I wasn't concentrating on the title of the books. Next to the bookshelf was a sink, and I remember turning on the tap and the hot tap, and there was some kind of gunge or whatever coming out of it. It wasn't just water. So that kind of alarmed me. And then there was a partition curtain. On the other side of that curtain was a bucket. In those days, there were no flush toilets in the cells. If you wanted to do your business, you had to use the bucket after 7 p.m. when the cell doors are locked. And to my misfortune, my new cellmate, his name was Simeon, he had developed a chronic form of diarrhea. So you can imagine how much the cell stank. It really did. It got right up my nose. And because of that, I could hardly sleep. I could not claim sleep. And it got so much of me that Simeon tried to talk to me for the first 2, 3 days, but in the end, I just couldn't take it anymore. And I just lost my temper and went for him. I really wanted to beat him because, of my situation. But to my misfortune, Simeon knew a little about karate and so on. So he had he'd give me 2 or 3 blows, and he had me in this headlock, and he told me to calm down, but I wouldn't calm down, so he would not let me out of this headlock. But after a while, He managed to calm me down. And I sat up, and for the rest of that night, he wanted to know my story, basically. And so I told him my story. It was a long, long night, and I had a lot of anger to get off my chest. I was angry with my parents for leaving me in this situation. I was angry with the institutions that had raised me. I was angry with everybody, to be honest. I felt so alone, so isolated. And Simeon suggested that, because my schooling was interrupted from the age of 15, that I should at least read about where I come from, my history. And so he presented me a book from his bookshelf. And that book, L.R. James, and he explained to me that this book describes the 1791 slave revolt in Haiti. And it was led by this incredible hero called Toussaint Louverture. And he said, Alex, you need to know about your culture. You need to learn about your history. So he gave me the book and I started to read. And as I mentioned earlier, I've always been an incredible, avid, good reader. So the long words didn't bother me. I read it, and that gave me a sense of pride reading that, because in UK schools, you would never read a history like that, not at all, not in history class, not in any kind of class. My education was full of Henry VIII and his six wives, the Spanish Armada that Queen Elizabeth I defeated. It's all about English and Scots kings and queens, nothing about black people whatsoever, nothing. And so Simeon became my kind of fount of knowledge, if you like, where I could learn about black cultures, not just in the Caribbean, but the USA as well. And this is where I read Ralph Ellison, The Invisible Man. This is where I read so many other American authors, including James Baldwin, Richard Wright, the poet Langston Hughes, and that uplifted me. It really elevated me, and I kept out of trouble in prison. I only served 7 or 8 months, and I was educating myself through reading. And on my last day, Simeon said to me, Alex, you must carry on. Don't let this be the end. Make sure you join your local library and continue reading. So that is what I did. On my second day of release, I went to Brixton Library. I became a member, and my education continued. And I had the urge to start writing my own narrative. And that came in a form of poetry. It came in a form of little short diary. And also, reggae was a big deal in Brixton back in my day when I was 18, 19 years of age. There were sound systems on every corner. And so me and my friends started to build a sound system. Now, because I was writing poetry and song lyrics and so on, I was selected to be the MC. And so basically, I began writing almost every day. I used to keep a small notepad in the back of my pocket along with a pencil. And basically, I would write down my experiences or situations I had observed. And I didn't know it at the time, but it really accelerated my writing talent because it became a habit. So slowly but surely, I was getting better and better. And I was still living in a very gracious kind of situation. The police and riot experience in 1981, all they did was just arm themselves and make sure they were better prepared for the next riot. There was no kind of a dialogue between us or the police. They just wanted to prepare themselves in a better way. So, they kind of looked like RoboCops, say 5, 10 years from then, with the helmets and everything, the special shields that they had. But there was, no kind of will to improve relations with the police, parallel to the experience in the US of A. So that was still to come. So you could still be arrested. Even in the mid 1980s or the early 1990s, you could still be arrested by the police on suspicion. And so, if they believe that you was about to commit a crime, say, looking through a jeweler shop or standing outside a bank, the police could arrest you, take you away to the police station, and charge you with something, even though you hadn't done anything. So that's how it is. And many of my friends were caught up in that. So there was still a lot of anger towards the establishment, the police and authorities, and so on. But I was more educated, so I managed to find a job in engineering. I kept on writing, and I began to narrate or perform my poetry in black kind of poetry events in and around Brixton, and I did okay. At first, I was very nervous. It wasn't like a sound system dance where sometimes they could not even see the DJ. Um, it was a very different experience because everyone is and so on, and there's a spotlight on a little stage, and you went up there, and it was just silence all around you until you began your bit of poetry or song or whatever you wanted to perform. But it was important for me because I had suffered a lot of trauma in my life, and performing my work, it gave me license to get rid of all this anger that I held within my head and my chest. So those events were crucial for my development, I believe. And so I felt I had something to live for. I found a partner, I had children, and so on. I felt yes, and I started to trace my family. I went back to social services. I demanded that to read my social services file, and from there I learned about my mother's full name, my father's full name, and so on. And fortunately for me, I found my father in 1987. And indeed, we were reunited. And it was quite on the first meeting because I had his file that he was the one who placed me into care and he never returned to collect me. So I carried a lot of anger about that. But after a tense first meeting, he um, he kind of apologized, not a full apology, but I think he made his apology by taking me out. He knew that I was interested in reading and so on. And so the first day trip that he took me on was the North Coast to Noel Coward, the English playwright's old house. And next door to Noel Coward's house, which was a tourism site, was Fort Haldane. Now, Fort Haldane was an old British garrison that looked out, and it was a warning kind of post for because the Spanish and the English were at war for many years, so the British had built a garrison to watch out for them. So and I didn't know at the time, but that was the site where the legendary Chief Tacky raided in his own slave revolt in 1761. And years later, I would write a novel about that, Cane Warriors, which was very important for me that I write that. So, yes, my father took me also to Port Royal. And this is a place where many pirates in the 18th and 19th century is where they hang out. People like Captain Morgan, Captain Blackbeard, all these famous pirates, Jellicoe of money because they were raiding ships on the Spanish main that belonged to Spain. And so it made these pirates very rich. I mean, for example, Captain Morgan was one of the richest people in the Caribbean, if not the richest. And of course, Jamaica had their own plantation, just like the South of America. And I learned about that, and about the struggles they had, all the revolts and so on. And it just made my eyes water. The suffering that my ancestors had to endure. I guess it was pretty much like the American experience, or somebody finding out what happened to their ancestors. It was. I remember watching Roots as well, roots, that affected me deeply. And at the time, I thought, well, maybe it doesn't kind of relate to me because maybe my people are from the Caribbean, not the US of A. But of course, anybody who was born on the other side of the Atlantic who are black, probably, and that was the reality. And I found it very hard to accept. And the UK, even now, they're a little bit in denial. Like, before the pandemic, when I went on a tour in Germany, um, almost all school children they get to know about the Holocaust, about what happened to so many millions of Jews. But in the UK, they tried to keep what happened with slavery to the corners. Try to sweep it. Have this kind of mentality that let's not discuss this. And they always think that the empire of the UK was a good one. But if you look around, what happened to black people in the Caribbean, Mau in Kenya, I believe Barack Obama's father, he was involved in that struggle. And you look what happened in India, situations, atrocities like Amritsar, where innocent people were just gunned down, children, babies, whatever. You think of the evil of the British Empire, and it was quite something. Now that it's now kind of accepted that authors like myself go into schools and we can address these issues of empire and so on. It's only the last few years where that's kind of become acceptable. Before, it wasn't. It was only confined to Black History Month and the Black events. But now I can go into a school, white kids or whatever, and talk about Cane warriors and the atrocities that were committed by the British Empire. And so more and more. And so I was first published in 1999 with a story that was familiar to me, very much familiar to me, because I knew many mixed race friends. And sometimes, because they didn't know their families, they're kind of set out in a wide world out there, and you might date who you could be related with. That was a reality. It happened to one of my friends. So I took that idea and wrote Brixton Rock. And it's about a man, mixed race man, going to live in a area like Brixton with the cultural diversity that was there. It was about the option of the police, and it was about meeting somebody and falling in love with somebody who happened to be related to my chief protagonist. And so that did quite well. I was working in engineering at the time. I had my own family to support. And because of the success of Brixton Rock, I decided to write a follow-up, East of Acre Lane. And East of Acre Lane has the backdrop to the Brixton uprising, we like to call it, of 1981. And because of that book, I was signed up by one of the bigger publishers. And I decided, right, this is my role in life. I'm gonna write untold stories that are not necessarily those in the UK. I wanted to tell of my perspective, my friend's perspective, and so on, because our stories have been hidden for so long. And I wanted to share that. I felt that my life is as valuable as the next man. And that was something that Simeon from prison that he instilled into me. He said, Alex, your life, I don't care how it started, your life is just as important as anybody. And I still believe that to this day drives me forward. It really does. And so there's no kind of relaxation there. I'm proud of where I came from. I'm proud of where I'm going. I'm proud of the struggle that my forefathers, my foremothers had to endure. So that is, the story of the outsider. And so I went on this career change, and it's very unusual for someone like myself who's never taken a degree, never went on to further education. So my education is just reading, but there are many roads into what you want to do, and so I'm proud of that. Really proud of that. And so, yes, I'm very proud of my career and the way it has developed. And the Steve McQueen Small Act series, I was one of the creatives, the writing creatives on that project. And Steve he always wanted to do a story about the 9 black people who stood up and defended themselves in court when they were wrongly charged with all kinds of offences. And because I believe that one of his relations was very close to that trial, the Mangrove 9 trial. And so that was one of the dramas that we developed and worked on. But one morning he came in and he said he really wants a man who has experience of institutions, children's homes, prisons. And one of my fellow writers pointed to me and said, "Alex, that is your story." So Steve looked at me and said, "Alex, what is your story?" So I related my tale. And at the end of that, he said, "Right, that is what we're going to do for episode 4, I think it was." So that is how Alex Wheatle, the drama, the hour-long drama, was born. And that was quite overwhelming. It really was a real experience of me kind of floating over this project and looking down at the actor who's playing me. That was quite strange. It really was. But again, Steve was like me. He wanted to put front and center with stories that have not appeared on British television for so many years. It's always been another story, or upstairs, downstairs, or Downton Abbey, about historical dramas. So it was incredible to watch this series and our stories being front and center on that. So I felt really proud about that achievement, and it was an incredible achievement. Um, to this day, we are still struggling with police persecution. Just last year, an unarmed black man was shot to death. There were marches against that, and so there's still a long way to go with the Metropolitan Police. That is the organisation that polices London and other police forces around the country. There's still a long way to go. These racist police officers that poison the police force, and we now know that more black people should join the police force. So it's not a them and us situation. That's still there. And also, a few years ago, there was the Windrush scandal, where many West Indians who were at the time when they came over to the UK and they came on their parents' passports. Basically, they were told that they had no place in the country. And many of them were sent back to the Caribbean, not knowing any family whatsoever in the Caribbean. And that was called the Windrush scandal. So that really alarmed many people. So, no, but basically, it comes down to racism. So we are still fighting racism at a very high level. We're talking about the government, the Home Office, and so on. So there's still much right for, I believe, and much that my children, and if I have any grandchildren, that they might have to fight for as well. But we have to take up those stances, if you like. Otherwise, they would trample all over us. I mean, just the other day, a government minister is the best place for black people to prosper. No, it's not. No, it's not. We're still being held back in many ways, in education, in the justice system, in opportunities, and so many other fields of aspiration. But we have, we're in a better place than we were in 1981 when the riots erupted, not just in Brixton, but in black communities all over the UK, like Birmingham, Liverpool. And so we're in a better place. But for me, progress has been very slow, very slow. And so I'd like to see it speeded up, for my children's benefit and for their children's benefit. So that is me. And just recently, I released a biography, and that is called Sufferer. It's published both in the US and the UK, and it tells of my experience growing up in care, being a sound system man who loved reggae, my experiences of tracing my parents. So check it out, Sufferer. It's published by Akashic, I believe, US. So yes, I'm proud of what I've achieved in life. I mean, I never knew in a million years when I was a child that somebody would call me a doctor one day. I never believed that. So when I put on the gown and I was asked to make a speech in front of thousands of young students, that was incredible experience. It really was. And so I'm quite proud. I trace my family. I trace my father. We had a good relationship. He passed away in 2011. My mother is still alive. She just celebrated her 92nd birthday. She lives in Washington D.C. I have two sisters who live around Washington D.C. and two in Miami, and it's a pleasure and a joy to year if I'm able to. Obviously, I couldn't visit them during the pandemic, and not this year either because I had been sick this year. And so I feel blessed. I really feel blessed because many of the people that I grew up with still don't know who their parents are or even what their names are. So I feel very blessed and fortunate that I know my family, I know my parents, I know where I come from. So that is my story. That is my tale. I hope you've enjoyed listening to me. So thank you very much for giving me your time. Thank you very much.
Alex, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your story with us. Just to remind you all, the title of Alex's book is Sufferer, Brixton Reggaehead, Alex Wheatle. You all can check it out if you're here in the UK. I myself have found it on Amazon UK. I wholeheartedly recommend that you check his book out. I know I am. That'll probably be my plane reading for when I head back to the US. I really have found your journey to be quite interesting and inspiring, Alex. So I really want to thank you for sharing that with us. I think that there are a lot of notes in here that really speak to the ability to be inspired by others, which is something that we encompass here at BENlabs, and the ability to fight through adversity, to really, be your best and have a part in community, which is another thing that we embody here. So thank you so much for sharing your story. I absolutely look forward to hearing more from you, about you, and I hope that my fellow coworkers here in the London office have enjoyed this, and I wholeheartedly hope that our U.S. counterparts will have an opportunity to watch this and to enjoy this as well. And we hope that we have an opportunity to talk with you again. And I want to
Yeah,
just thank you again from the bottom of my heart. From one sistren to a brethren.
yeah. Thank
I
you.
appreciate you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. That means a lot to me. Thank you. And indeed, we will
Absolutely. Well, everyone, that's it for Ben Live today. You know that with every really important message that we have to share from a cultural standpoint, you can find us here. I'm sure there'll be more coming up soon as we wrap up with Hispanic Heritage Month and go on to other tentpole months in the coming months. Thank you so much and have a great one. Bye.